We are getting exclusive audio from 2024 of Trump then as a candidate discussing details of a private conversation that he once had with President Putin. The audio obtained by the authors of a new book that is just out today. And for context, the president has long said that Putin would never have invaded Ukraine on his watch because of something he told him once privately. Trump had never revealed what that was.
I had a very strong conversation with President Putin, and he understood, and I won't go into the great details of the conversation because nobody has to know that, but I will tell you, it never, ever would have happened.
I don't want to say it, but did they fear me? I suspect they did.
Well, tonight we're learning those details as the audio reveals that Trump says that he threatened not just President Putin, but also China's President Xi Jinping. And this is what he told donors about what exactly that conversation looked like during a private fundraiser last year.
To Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb the shit out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. The public wants it. The public. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way. And I said, way. And then he goes like, I don't believe you, but the truth is he believed me 10%. And I told you this, he believed me 10%. Then I'm with President Xi of China, but I said the same thing to them. I said, you know, if you go into Taiwan, I'm going to bomb the shit out of Beijing. He thought I was crazy. He said, Beijing, you're going to bomb Beijing. I said, I have no choice. I got to bomb them. We're going to bomb Beijing. And he didn't believe me either, except 10%. And 10% is all you need. In fact, 5% would have been okay too. And we never had a problem. We would have never had a problem.
The Trump campaign declined to comment on the content of what you just heard there, but the three deeply sourced reporters who acquired that exclusive audio are joining me now tonight. Josh Dawsey of the Wall Street Journal, Isaac Arnsdorf of the Washington Post, of course also Tyler Pager of the Times as well, are all three the authors on the book that is out today. 2024, how Trump retook the White House and the Democrats lost America. And Josh Dawsey, I mean, you obviously have covered Trump along with me for years now. Given the audio of what you heard the president saying about Putin then, I wonder what you made of how fed up he seemed with him today.
Well, I think what he was trying to tell the donors there, Caitlin, was that he could have deterred this. He could have stopped this. You heard him say on the campaign trail, if you re-elect me, I can stop this immediately. And it's clear Vladimir Putin has not been listening to what Trump wants, right? I mean, Trump says, I've been doing all these calls, they're frustrating. Today he unleashed a profanity as he was sort of describing what he thought of Vladimir Putin and what he was doing. But what you see in that tape is Trump behind closed doors to his richest donors in New York, telling them, you know, I had control over these guys, basically espousing the madman theory, right? They thought I was just crazy enough that maybe I would have done something if they crossed me. And I used that to basically get them to do what I wanted them to do. And I think what the frustration you're seeing now from President Trump, you know, we've reported he says Vladimir Putin has changed. He makes all of these comments in private about how he used to think he had a better relationship with Vladimir Putin. And I think Putin's just not listening to him. Putin's not listening to what Trump wants him to do.
Yeah, I mean, and Isaac, when Trump was running, and obviously that is a deep part of the book, is what the Trump campaign looked like internally, as well as the Biden-Harris campaign. But when he was running, the argument that he made to voters was, I can fix this. I can handle this. You know, Putin is scared of me and intimidated by me, as Josh mentioned there. And now here we are, that he's been in office for several months and is realizing that Putin isn't showing a lot of interest in getting the deal that Trump wants here.
Well, more often than Putin being scared of him, it was, you know, Putin was someone he had a good relationship with. And Trump has often talked about Putin as someone who could make a deal with, you know, that they could find some common ground. And a lot of Russia specialists in the U.S. national security establishment looked at that and said, you know, Putin is not interested in improving relations with the West. He wants nothing to do with the West. It just doesn't work that way. You can just give him what he wants and he's going to go home. That's not a way to resolve this war. And Trump is finding that out the hard way now that he's 6 months into past due on his promise for that war to be over. And he's clearly frustrated.
This is like Trump is sounding different because he's humiliated. Now, I want to clarify that he doesn't actually care about Ukraine. He doesn't give a damn. Like, right, ideologically, in many ways, he's very close to Vladimir Putin. I think Trump, in a very maybe perverse way, admires Putin, admires his strongman status, admires the fact that there's no term limit. Well, there are term limits in Russia, but Putin's doing the thing where he switches jobs and that resets the, he's been able to stay in power for more than a generation. Like that he pushes a right-wing MAGA style ideology. Trump loves all of this, but he doesn't like being humiliated, and Putin's humiliating him because remember, he was the one that said, I'm going to get a deal done, and then the deal never got done, in part probably because Putin didn't want to make a deal, and then they said they had some kind of truce done or de-escalation. It wasn't a ceasefire, it was some kind of de-escalation, and then the next day Putin upped the bombings, right? And so Trump is being humiliated here, and it's because Russia keeps putting out information that hurts him, and more information is coming out, not always from Russia, but maybe sometimes, that shows the division within Trump world. And this is where it gets truly ugly.
But you've learned what happened.
Yeah, Aaron, so my colleague Zach Cohen and I are getting a little bit of a better sense of the timeline here and just how all of this played out. What we're told is that Secretary of Defense Hegseth did not actually inform the White House prior to approving that pause on the weapons shipments. And that pause actually came about because President Trump last month, when he was on a trip to NATO with Secretary of Defense Hegseth, with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he asked them for essentially a state of play when it comes to the U.S. weapons stockpiles because, of course, Iran and Israel were attacking each other and U.S. troops in the Middle East were put at risk. And so he essentially wanted an assessment of, hey, do we have enough in the region in order to protect U.S. troops if they need to defend themselves? But Secretary of Defense Hegseth then kind of delegated that request down to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Albridge Colby, who ultimately himself made that recommendation to pause this weapons shipment. But Secretary Hegseth ultimately did sign off on it. Now, after all of that, we're told that pause was not actually told to the White House in real time. The White House found out about it in large part through press reports, including Secretary of State Rubio, who is also the president's national security advisor, was not looped in on this beforehand. And so we're told that after he found out about this pause, Trump actually pressed Hegseth to release at least part of that shipment of Patriot interceptors to the Ukrainians because, as we have heard Trump say repeatedly in recent days, the Ukrainians need those defensive weapons. And we're told that he sent much the same message to President Zelensky during that phone call on Friday, in which, yet again, he also downplayed his role in the decision to pause these weapons shipments, Aaron.
All right, Natasha, thank you very much. And incredible, though, what you're saying, that this was paused and the White House was not informed. The National Security Advisor was not informed. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. Retired General Wesley Clark and David Axelrod are with me now. So, David, you spent a lot of time working in a White House. So when you hear this, that the defense secretary signs off on pausing weapons shipments to Ukraine, does not tell the White House, does not tell the national Marco Rubio in his role, and the President Trump says he didn't know who even did this and who approved it. When you hear all this, what do you hear?
Absolutely astonishing. I mean, I'll yield to General Clark, who's got a much richer and deeper grasp of military history than I do. But I will tell you from my years in the White House, the idea that a decision like that would be taken on a matter of such import and obviously in a critical place without the National Security Advisor being informed and the President of the United States is beyond belief to me. And if I were the president, I'd be furious about that. I thought it was odd at the cabinet meeting today when Caitlin asked him that question and he said, well, I don't know, you tell me. And the Secretary of Defense was sitting right next to him. So the whole thing was peculiar. Look, I hope this change of heart is real and that these systems go through in full. There's some talk of an additional Patriot air defense system this evening that he wants to send more. That would be great. But this raises alarm bells about how decisions are being made.
I mean, General Clark, it certainly seems to you that something like this would be delegated to an undersecretary and sort of signed, sealed, delivered, and take effect with no one telling anybody in the White House or telling Marco Rubio in his role.
Well, first it says there's no real policy about Ukraine that's a well-defined, staffed policy. That's the first thing. Secondly, I'm sure that they thought they were following through on the president's intent. You know, the president has used rhetoric about Putin for several months now. I'm frustrated. This is not right, blah, blah, blah. Vlad, stop it. But he never has done anything. And so you have to believe, if you're in the administration, that all along there's, there's an understanding. It's what Vice President Vance said at the Munich conference. He says, you Europeans are going to have to take care of yourselves. We're too busy. We don't have the resources, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think they just thought they were following through on the president's priorities. But back to what David said, the rhetoric's fine. But if you're going to really provide defense, what is defense? You want defense? Shoot the archer, not the arrows. Shoot the archer. And that means going deep, airfields, a lot of things, not just Patriot missiles.
Right. And obviously, in terms of changing what's actually going to be provided, which, David, brings me to what Trump said today. Because as General Clark points out, yes, his rhetoric about frustration with Putin has risen over recent months, right? But his actions and his long history has said the opposite. So what he said today was very significant about Putin. Here it is again.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
So,
yeah, if he,
David, what do you think this means?
Yeah. I don't know what it means because the president hasn't been very consistent on a lot of different things. This is stunning because he has been so defensive of Putin and on a lot of issues. I mean, we stood up for them at the UN. We haven't applied additional sanctions, though the Congress wants to. We put higher tariffs on Ukraine, but not Russia. There's been a lot of rhetoric from the president, but he's not done anything, as the general said. So what this means now, we don't know. His language, if you listen to it, was we need to send them some. What does that mean? Yeah. I think the Ukrainians are anxious to find out.
Yeah, I think as General Clark said, it's the definition of that could mean absolutely everything. But the rhetoric and the president going and actually, swearing, using the word bullshit to describe what Putin's doing is obviously expressing a new level of frustration, at least that we've publicly seen. Thank you both so very much.
Should be clear, guys, that the authors of this book, those aren't the tapes that are being leaked. That's not leaked by Russia. These are authors putting out their information. But we have seen Russia release videos of their bombings and videos of Putin meeting with America's quote-unquote enemies. Now, let's be clear, in this particular case, the United States was the bad guy. Iran was the victim. Let's be clear about that. But Putin's like, I'm going to have meetings with Iran after Trump does that, thumbing his nose at Donald Trump, saying, I'm going to leak information that I'm not abiding by your world order. And again, this is not an ideological fight between Trump and Putin. This is, like, not to be too vulgar, a pissing match between two right-wing, or one a definitive dictator, yes, and one a wannabe dictator whose goal is to be America's Putin. And frankly, when we're talking about these guys, where you think they should be best bros, it's often the case that there can only be one big dog at the top of the heap.